Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Oh, yeah. To this day, I read some Russian, some Polish,
Why don't you
and some German.
feel free to stand and sing with us the chant for the seasons, the summer line. And it's on 73, or no, it's not going to be up there still. You'll have to look at your book. 73, chant for the seasons. Vernal clouds have turned the star wheel. Summer is upon us. Gliding are the hawks and the wood. Is upon us. Gliding are the hawks, hovering above the hot and yellow hillside. Vernal clouds have turned the star wheel. Summer is upon us. Crickets in the night, chirping in our ears, the sound of moonlit music. Vernal clouds have turned the star wheel. Summer is upon us.
Good morning. I'm Richard Steele, today's lay leader, and I welcome all to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. This includes those who are with us in person here in the sanctuary, remote attendees who have connected via our streaming feed to watch the service, and those who are using Zoom to participate interactively from locations around North America and beyond. We are glad each of you is here. And I have one brief announcement to make. It's no longer up there, but this Thursday, there is going to be a concert, and all are invited. It's going to be at Sacred Heart Healing Gardens, and it will feature Todd Milne, who operates our audiovisual, and Jackie Sandberg, our UUCS pianist. So it will take place at Sacred Heart across 8th Street from the emergency room. So today we have a guest speaker, our very own UUCS congregant, Luba Johnston. Lyubov Sergeyevna, as she would have been known for the first 51 years of her life in polite address in society, speaks from experience. She is a Russian national, and when she was born, her homeland, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, was still relatively young, having been formed but 22 years earlier under Vladimir Lenin. Her life there spanned the years from World War II through the Cold War, later to so-called détente, which was marked by increased trade and exchanges of students and scholars, in which I myself participated. Subsequently, there was Perestroika and Glasnost, the reforms under Gorbachev, in which he attempted to loosen the stranglehold of the Communist Party over social, economic, cultural, and political activities in the USSR. But ultimately, as you'll hear, from her perspective, the USSR collapsed and dissolved in 1991. We're privileged to have Luba in our congregation, and I personally look forward to hearing today's presentation. Please join me in giving Luba a very warm welcome. Я могу сказать, Люба Сергеевна, мы очень рады, что вы здесь. Я бы хотел выразить нашу благодарность.
In Russian. The same was in English.
So, whether you're here in our sanctuary today or watching from afar, it is here that we join to create a nourishing religious home with a mission to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in the wider world, or as we say more concisely, to create community, find meaning, and, okay, I hear work for justice. Now, please take a few minutes to greet one another. Okay. I'll just put this stuff over here.
Over here,
Yeah.
and the
Great.
glasses, because this is good print. I can read without, but
Yeah.
I cannot read without.
I see that. That's a little bit smaller.
This is smaller. yes.
Yeah,
I was
okay.
saving paper.
Okay. Give me a call next time. I'll print it up on with larger print so it'll be easier for you to read.
Okay.
I just got to touch bases with you.
Oh, yes, yes. Done for drinking. Yes, yes, I'm okay. Thank you.
We turn now from our informal greetings to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individuality. May this small flame be an offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it cast or reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. For our opening reflection, I want to add a bit more context to Luba's presentation today. She was born in 1943 in the industrial city of Magnitogorsk, which is located at the southern end of the Ural Mountains. Those are the mountains that demarcate Europe from Asia. And on this map that she brought today, you can see the crest of the Ural Mountains identified by yellow dots. At that time, when she was born, Joseph Stalin was the Soviet leader. The USSR was the World War II ally of the United States and the United Kingdom against Nazi Germany. Military operations on Russian soil were massive and grinding and brutal, and civilian life was marked by extreme deprivation. Following Germany's defeat, conditions of life around Luba improved, but only slowly. She was 10 years old when Stalin died in 1953. Her teen years coincided with the period of so-called de-Stalinization, including Nikita Khrushchev's 1956 secret speech to the Supreme Soviet on Stalin's cult of the personality and his crimes, and the subsequent thaw, which saw the relaxation of censorship against writers and artists in the first openings to the West. It was, in fact, from 1956 to 1964, when Luba turned 21 and when Khrushchev was ousted, that the Soviet Union was perhaps at its most expansive and optimistic. The USSR beat the US into space in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik. It sent the first astronauts or cosmonauts up into space. In 1959, Khrushchev engaged Nixon in the so-called kitchen debate and predicted that Soviet standard of living would overtake that in the US in coming years. But that was not to be. The bombastic and mercurial Khrushchev was ousted in a Kremlin power struggle and replaced by the conventional and pedestrian and, over time, increasingly sclerotic Leonid Brezhnev. His 18-year reign through 1982 would see the economy stagnate, leaders ossify, and eventually the Communist Party unable to accommodate demands for greater autonomy and freedom, both from within the Soviet Union and from the client states in the Warsaw Bloc, East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and then again in the 1980s, Poland. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and in 1991, the USSR dissolved. These events provide the backdrop for Luba's presentation.
Okay, please sing with us One More Step. One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our hearts and minds, and whom we want to wrap in our love and care. We light a candle for them this morning. We light a candle for the people of Ukraine who are fighting and dying to protect their homeland against the Russian war of aggression. and we mourn all the innocent victims of military violent activities in the Mideast, whether in the Gaza Strip, or the West Bank, the State of Israel, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, or beyond. We also hold in our thoughts all those in our country living in terror of ICE raids, being conducted by masked, armed, unidentified, and brutish thugs without due process, warrants, or even basic humanity. This is an administrative assault on civil society and the rule of law. That must end. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts. You are welcome to say their names aloud. Those named aloud and those remembered in silence, we hold in our community of compassion. It was brought to my attention that I neglected to mention the time of Thursday's event by Sacred Heart. It will be at noon this coming Thursday, so please mark that on your calendar. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains the community and its mission to the larger world.
Thank you, Rashe. That's my favorite song from The Sounds of Music. And not only that, it's a prelude for Stories for All Ages. That's why, kids, if you want to come closer, you're welcome. I can show you something later. But if you want to stay where you are, that's okay, too. Today, my story is about flowers and their symbols. You may know that traditional Spokane Lilac Festival began as a flower show parade. In many countries, flowers became national emblems, representing the country's natural beauty, culture, and historical significance. You know the national flower of the United States, don't you? You don't? What? It's rose. Rose, rose, rose. Rose is also Bulgaria's national flower. And red poppy, the emblem of Poland, was chosen in remembrance and sacrifice of soldiers. In Austria, we heard Edelweiss symbolizes courage and love. I think everyone knows Canada's emblem, yeah? Oh, yeah, maple leaf. How about Holland? Oh, while most people believe tulip to be the national flower of Netherlands, disappointment. A different flower was elected in a public vote 2 years ago, and the majority chose daisy. Yeah. While oxeye daisy is the emblem of Denmark, Slovenia and Spain chose carnation as their national flower. In Ukraine, the people's choice is sunflower, the symbol of hope and optimism. When I lived in Russia, I heard nothing about its national flower. It happened that 25 years ago, Russia officially declared chamomile, or a white daisy, its national flower. Why do people like this humble flower? Daisies were mentioned long ago in Russian literature and songs. Daisies' petals were often associated with childhood, symbolizing innocence. During weddings, flower girls scattered daisy petals as a symbol of purity, beauty, health, love, and loyalty. Long time ago, very long time ago, Russian girls and women had a popular ritual to foretell future events with the help of daisies, and they know the secret. I'll tell you. Traditionally, at the end of May, girls picked up daisies to find out if their sweethearts still love them or not. What did they do? They plucked the petals one by one, and I can show you how they did that. So imagine this is a flower. So they plucked the petals one, like, he loves me. He doesn't love me. He loves me. Oh no. And so on and so forth until the last petal will give the answer. It may be yes, it may be no. Well, as a matter of fact, my school girlfriends and I used to play that game too. We would ask a question, shall I pass my test? And then we would pull off the petals until we have the answer. Shall we try something like kids? Would you like to know if it works? Try asking daisies. All right, now we're going to sing the kids out to their place.
As we prepare for meditation, I invite you to find a comfortable position, relax, breathe deeply, and reflect on the words of Norman Davies, Oxford-educated European historian, from his 1996 book, Europe, A History. This is on the collapse of the Soviet Union. His words. The most obvious fact of the Soviet collapse is that it happened through natural causes. The Soviet Union was not, like ancient Rome, invaded by barbarians, or, like the Polish Commonwealth, partitioned by rapacious neighbors, or, like the Habsburgs' empire, overwhelmed by the strains of a great war. It was not, like the Nazi Reich, defeated in a fight to the death. It died because it had to, because the grotesque organs of its internal structures were incapable of providing the essentials of life. In a nuclear age, it could not, like its Tsarist predecessor, solve its internal problems by expansion, nor could it suck more benefit from the nations whom it had captured. It could not tolerate the partnership with China, which had once promised a global future for communism. It couldn't stand the oxygen of reform. So it imploded. It was struck down by the political equivalent of a coronary, more massive than anything that history affords. Okay, everybody meditate.
Thank you, Jackie. That was the music played at my school graduation party. Yeah. And With encouragement of our minister, Todd, I decided to have as Debbie said, a date with the pulpit. Yes. So, anyways, people say life is a journey. My journey began in the Soviet Union during the Second World War. In 1941, my father, a musician, was evacuated with his symphony orchestra from the west of the country to the city in the Urals, where he met my mom. Sadly, Mom became a widow at the age of 29, and Dad died of pulmonary TB when I was just 6 years old. My childhood memories were not filled with warmth. I remember scary sounds of rats squeaking under the floor of a daylight basement. A communal flat we shared with our neighbors had a spacious kitchen with a loudspeaker on the wall, a tiny toilet, no bath, no hot water. Every morning I heard the hymn of the Soviet Union that sounded for me like a funeral march. We lived about 3 miles from the metal plant. When the wind was blowing in our direction, the air, polluted by the smokestacks, brought the smell of rotten eggs. At the age of 10, I came down with active TB and missed many months of school in the process of treatment in the hospital and sanatorium. That was a very useful experience, by the way, because when I came to Spokane, I became a poster child of how Russians treated tuberculosis. Catching up with the rest of the class back there required the ability to learn a lot by heart, including songs and poems praising Comrade Stalin. We were taught Russia was surrounded by enemies, but our country was big and unbeatable. My hero was Ded Moroz, that is Russian Santa, who distributed identical lunch bags of goodies for kids on the New Year's Eve. It was a joyful time of sliding down icy hills and eating mandarins from China. College students went to dancing parties unless they were expelled from universities for their independent thinking. I loved my English teacher and hated history lessons on the advantages of socialism. I still remember the Communist Manifesto, quote, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." Sounds democratic, doesn't it? The period of Khrushchev's leadership was both complicated and controversial, to say nothing of the Cuban Missile Crisis that coincided with my graduation year. On the one hand, our high school teachers promoted the value of knowledge and education. On the other hand, the government did its best to protect us from very bad news, like a terrible mass execution of the workers in Rostov region, and the news about a radioactive spill at the nuclear facility that happened to be not very far from my city. While international community denounced the entry of Soviet troops into Hungary and Czechoslovakia, only 8 people came to the Red Square with a protest. Even though many people were not happy about the Soviet Union actions, there was no resistance to injustice. Understandably, political activism in the country was effectively suppressed. Discipline reigned everywhere. Don't ask, say and do as you are instructed. I felt a strong dislike for the uniformity and the censorship and the centralization that ruled every aspect of life. I just remembered that what was funny about apartments that we lived in. The central heating apartment was regulated by the city, no matter what the temperature outside was. It may be very hot, and the heat was blasting still in our radiators. It turned cold, but there was no heat because that was the time according to their schedule to turn it off. Centralization. Well, newspapers. I would like to say about newspaper articles, and sure, they were censored all over, like. Not only newspapers, movie and theater scripts were censored for politically incorrect words or statements. For example, the phrase, "I care less for your Sovieti," would be banned because in the Russian language, the word Sovieti has two meanings, both advice and the governing body. So the governing body, Soviets, Sovieti, came into being after Lenin's declaration that every worker, every housewife can govern the state. By the way, when I hear here in this country about political correctness, I remember a movie, don't remember what movie, the name and so on, but there was a character, a communist, during the meeting. He was talking to the audience and somebody criticized something and he said, "Comrade, your facts may be true, but they are not politically correct." That's why I think that political correctness was introduced in Russia. So many good books were banned, including the ones about religion and sex. Seriously, we were raised to believe babies were found in a cabbage patch. A famous novel, Dr. Zhivago, by Boris Pasternak, by the way, if you haven't seen that movie, I recommend. I watched it here in the United States for the first time without reading the book because it was banned for 30 years there. So anyways, Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak was banned in the country for 30 years because of its heartbreaking depiction of tragedies caused by the Russian Revolution and the Civil War. I had no idea that Bolsheviks rented German ships to transport 2 million Russian intellectuals on the so-called philosophers' steamers. The people who were not able to pay for their departure had to wait in prison after signing a statement to leave the country. The cleansing of the best and the brightest continued in Stalin labor camps. It shames me that for a long time I knew nothing about my grandparents' survival during that period. It was my second cousin Zoya, a librarian for Kiev Library Archives, who filled me in. As a side note, Zoya's mother spent 20 years in a labor camp, accused of treason for being a German translator in occupied Ukraine. From my cousin, I got to know about my grandparents and how they lived during the Red Terror of 1920s. At that time, they were a young couple with 2 babies living near Polish border. The Bolsheviks had a list of enemies to be arrested without a warrant or executed without a trial. My ancestors had bad luck to fit the profile of enemies. Grandpa was the son of a priest, and Grandma's father was a Pole who had fled to Poland. The only way for them to survive was to move across the country to a voluntary exile. Hiding from authorities and snitches, my grandparents found a safe place, a settlement on the banks of the Ural River. They didn't tell me they didn't want to talk about their past. I learned about it much later. They moved to the place where 100,000 of forcibly relocated people, political prisoners, prisoners of war, were building a huge steel plant. Regretfully, the memory of 10,000 people buried in mass graves was erased soon, because for the Soviets, it was more important to glorify the victory in the war and its leader. After the personality cult of Stalin was exposed, there was no repentance, no punishment. In fact, Stalinism never died. I know many people still justify the dictator. I disliked Victory Day parades, blooming with red flags, large portraits of the party leaders, and the slogan to catch up and outrun the United States of America. For a good reason, the first satellite and the first Russian astronaut in the orbit were hailed as the greatest victory of socialism. And then Vietnam War made the US even an easier target for criticism. To tell the truth, life was predictable in the USSR. You know, there was no rampant homelessness, no unemployment. People without jobs were called parasites and served a mandatory labor for the community. Certainly, there were people in the country who were more equal than the others, but most of us had similar standards of living. According to a Russian-born British journalist Kissin, the answer to poverty was the equivalent of helping wheelchair users by cutting the other people's legs off. So what to do? We found consolation in the sentiment, we might be poor, but great in our spirit and souls. The majority, being extremely susceptible to communist propaganda, believed the Soviet Union was a brotherhood of nations, despite unjustified relocation of ethnic groups from the western part of the country to the east before the war. The people, that majority, I don't know how to call that majority, the silent majority, they either did not know or did not care that hundreds of thousands of people were dying in packed railway boxcars on their way to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Siberia. My next-door neighbor, Elsa, was born in a family of ethnic Germans who lived on the banks of the Volga River. At the beginning of the war, all Russian Germans were ordered to pack their belongings within 24 hours and board a train going east. All their property was seized for the benefits of the society. Well, on a more cheerful note, the Soviet project had certain positive effect. Old tales described Russian women as submissive servants of their husbands. Soviet women got the right to vote and the right to a simplified divorce. Women acquired a paid maternity leave 2 months before and 12 months after the delivery. Equally important was a state-funded daycare, though we were not told that those free benefits had been already paid for, as the compensation for our work did not align with the market standards. The statement, "Every Soviet citizen owns everything in the country," was sometimes interpreted in a peculiar way as a permission to steal. People would take home building materials from construction sites or free produce from diners and restaurants. Perhaps that was a way of making ends meet. Soviet public health care was free, but the system was poor and corrupt. Only Communist Party powerful elite and their families enjoyed high-quality treatment. Ordinary folks gave money to medical providers, well, as a token of gratitude to grossly underpaid professionals. I truly appreciated our free higher education, despite its mandatory course on the Communist Party history. You may find it unusual, but female college students majoring for foreign languages like myself were trained to become nurses for military reserve in case the United States invades Russia. Sounds unusual, but it helped me, really. That 2-year medical course helped me to work here at the public health. So many years passed, and I benefited from that education. You may also be surprised to know the academic year in the USSR began not in classes, not in auditoriums, but on the collective farms. Free students' labor was quite helpful during harvest time. Besides, with proper supervision, the students were kept out of trouble. Occasionally, we heard rumors about dissidents sent to involuntary mental health institutions or to imprisonment. The news about individuals defecting the country was promptly hushed up, especially regarding prominent defectors like Stalin's daughter, KGB intelligence officers, or famous ballet dancers. We heard of men jumping into the ocean from cruise ships and succeeding to immigrate. Recently on YouTube, I found a story from a guy, actually a Russian guy, who did that attempt 3 times for 20 years. And he managed, because not only he was an engineer from Leningrad or at that time, but he also was an athlete training for swimming. So he managed to swim day and night and reached an island, and then was helped by the people and lived until 93 or 96 in California, died recently. So almost every Russian was a hostage of the system. In 1975, there was a mutiny aboard a Soviet warship. Later, that event was used by Tom Clancy in his book, The Hunt for Red October. By and large, there was little change in the Soviet Union for about 20 years when my spouse and I lived in Kurgan, a Siberian city that received much attention due to Dr. Elizarov, an orthopedic ER student. Elizarov invented an external ring fixation method of bone correction and lips lengthening, now used in many countries. However, he couldn't promote his method for a long time because Moscow didn't want to recognize the ingenuity of a provincial physician. He became famous only after his successful treatment of Brummel. Well, all the people might know his name. He was the world champion in high jump at that time. As a result, the construction of a new orthopedic center began, but soon it was stopped for lack of funds. There is an intrigue story behind the successful completion of the center, involving 2 famous musicians, Rostropovich and Shostakovich. You know this name, don't you? So, anyways, the story is so incredible, and I witnessed it because it was in 1970 when the country was celebrating 100th anniversary of Lenin's birth. So what happened? Shostakovich was experiencing some problem playing the piano. And his friend Rostropovich, a famous cello player, he said, I know somebody in Kurgan, in Siberia, a magical doctor. He, does everything to the limbs, to the bones, and so on. He can help you. Go and consult him. So Shostakovich did. He flew to Kurgan, and when Elizarov saw him, he realized that it was not a problem with bones. Probably it was some neurological or psychological problem, but Elizarov didn't want to say no to a famous person, a composer. So he said, okay, we'll help you. And they made a separate room for physical therapy of Shostakovich somewhere on the first floor of an old building. And Shostakovich, and Shostakovich was visited by Elizarov, like Elizarov pretended he was looking, saying, okay, you're doing better. Yeah, well, Shostakovich helped really better. And he was so grateful. He told his friend Rostropovich, we have to do something. This building, it needs to be the fourth floor, and will be finished. And they stopped on the third floor of the new Center for Research and Recovery. And they did. What did they do? They decided to do a remarkable fundraising. They initiated a concert. The symphony orchestra from Sverdlovsk, a very big city, symphony orchestra, came to Kurgan, to this Siberian city, and they played together with Shostakovich and Rostropovich. And because it was supposed to be approved by the Communist Party, how could it be approved? They thought, okay, we shall dedicate it to the 100th anniversary of the birth of Lenin. And so they did. And not only that, they did not invite common public that will bring some rubles. No. They invited big cheeses, the guys with connections. And those guys with connections did magic. After that, there was a concert. And then there was the so-called subbotnik. What is subbotnik? It's still used, the word used in Russia even now. Traditionally, we had to work on subbotnik, where we were taken to. Teachers, schools, children, students, and so on. That was a free labor in cleanup, planting, or watering. Subbotnik supposedly was the idea of Vladimir Lenin. Free labor for the benefits of the community. So probably there is still a photograph in Music College archives showing Rostropovich and Shostakovich with builder's tools standing on top of the third floor, pretending they were helping to finish that center. But it worked. Because a week or so later, trucks were moving the construction, building materials, and so on, and so forth. And it was completed, thanks to them. Despite the anti-West propaganda, we were curious about the life behind the Iron Curtain. When the borders were open at last, both Russian travelers abroad and foreigners in Russia were accompanied by vigilant KGB agents posing as tour guides or as part of a group. I worked for a small city college, not suspecting the big brother was watching me too. A friend of mine coming from England gave me the address of the Cambridge University professor. I sent a letter to Cambridge and was excited to get a prompt response. But then I was called to the administration office. A man in black sternly told me not to send any letters overseas without reporting it to the Communist Party committee. That was the end of my correspondence. Yeah, sorry. But it was a minor disappointment compared with the problems on a personal front. Tired of putting up with my husband's alcoholism, I filed for divorce and moved back to my hometown to live with Mom, a retired special education teacher. Much to my dismay, the city of my childhood met me as an outsider, as a foreigner. Looking for a job without connections was futile. Cronyism and nepotism were taken for granted. After a year without a job or any unemployment benefits, I got a temporary position, but then, late 80s, brought me hope for Gorbachev's democratic reforms. Imagine how terrified I was to watch TV reports about the coup in August of 1991. High-ranking military and KGB officials attempted to seize power. Dmitry Muratov, a Russian journalist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, spoke about some of the details of the plot. The conspirators planted bugs under the serving table of the room where Gorbachev was presenting his idea of transitioning from the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics to the United Soviet Sovereign Republic. The coup accelerated former Soviet republics' declaration of independence, resulting in disintegration of the USSR, and Gorbachev resigned. And then he was blamed for everything. He was blamed for the collapse of the Soviet Union, for the country's failing economy, for chaotic privatization and organized crime. The uniqueness of the post-Soviet period requires a separate conversation. But I'll tell you how I got to know American people. Thanks to the growing popularity of the English language in Russia, I found a permanent teaching job, like a teacher, English teacher, as a second language, began private tutoring, and joined the English Speaking Club, initiating correspondence with pen pals in Canada, United Kingdom, and the United States. Reading those letters was like opening the windows to a new world, because we didn't have many books at that time. By the way, speaking about the books, at the back table, there are several books I brought by different authors, and the postcards featuring my hometown. So if you want to borrow one of those books, if you are interested, you can borrow with the promise to return them back to me. And of course, if you have any questions, because I cannot, tell everything I know, you can come to the map, look at the map, and ask me questions. So anyway, English Speaking Club was something progressive in my hometown. Not only that, in my city, they started an exchange program called Hands Across the Water. The exchange program between local teachers and their counterparts in the United States. Care to guess why I did not qualify for the program? No? You don't? Yeah, it's hard to guess. That's why I'm telling you. The fact was, I had no phone, no car, no separate apartment, and above all, I had never been a Communist Party member. And that was one of the requirements too. Regardless of that, I decided to volunteer as an interpreter for the American teachers during their unofficial meetings, and they loved it. And for that, I was generously rewarded by a group of US teachers who sponsored my trip. And 4 weeks stay, imagine, 4 weeks stay for the first time in the United States on the East Coast. In July of 1993, I was taken to different states by my friends. And one of my friends, I'm still in very close connection. And one of the friends that was the initiator of sponsoring me to come to the United States. He was, or maybe he still works, a history teacher. So what he asked me when I was working like a volunteer, what he asked me is, I don't understand. So we have to host those that don't speak a word in English. And we cannot host you. You cannot come to our schools and tell us about your life in Russia. I said, that's life. I explained why I didn't qualify for the program. He was so mad. He said, okay, I'm going to sponsor you, and I can sponsor even a student from the English club. There was a guy. So the student, we went, well, when he promised, there was invitation, official, and everything and so on. We had to go through a process. And the process is, first of all, you cannot go to any country from Russia, well, now and then, more so, without a travel passport. We had only one passport. That inside passport is something like ID, but with much more information than American ID is. For example, name, birth, date of birth, and so on, marriage, when was married, divorce, when was divorced, children, when were the children born, the address where you lived all through your life, like in that year, that here, stamp, 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 stamp on inside passport. So to get an outside passport for traveling, you have to be vetted. What is a vetting system? Nobody was allowed to go to a capitalist country without preliminary being to one of the Soviet bloc countries, like in Europe. And I've never been abroad before that. What to do? My friends from the English club decided to help me. They had connections with the authorities at the metal plant. And those were communists, of course. So when I applied for a travel passport, they took my passport to this big cheese and said, please, 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 put a stamp that she went to Hungary or somewhere, because otherwise she wouldn't be allowed to go to America. So the guy stamped it. I got the stamp. I went for an interview. And that student went for an interview with me, too. We were interviewed by very, I would say, well, thoroughly. So the interview was asking about the position, about the salary, about the family, and whatnot. So they looked at the young man, and he was in front of me in the line, and said, no, we're not going to give you a visa to travel to the United States, because you are too young, you're a danger for defecting. That's it. So then I was after him, and they saw that he said, no. I was after him, and they looked at me, and they interviewed me, and they saw that in my description, I said that I participated in the exchange program. I did not tell them that I was participating unofficially, but the American representative at this consulate looked at that and said, okay, yeah, she participated, must be communist. Yeah. So anyway, and besides, she has she's old, she's almost 50, she's safe, yeah. Anyways, that's how I got my visa and got that remarkable, I would say remarkable, first experience of the life in America. But that was the experience of a visitor, of a guest. It's different. And even though I didn't have a culture shock like many people when they first go from the Soviet country to a capitalist country, they're shocked. I was not shocked. I was quite informed. But still, it was, very, very good for me. Not the same when you are living in the country. And many people from our church traveled to Russia and spent some time in Russia as guests. And I think this is different of being a guest and working there or living there. So anyway, Oh, my next trip to the United States, that was my first trip. My next trip to the United States was an account of marriage proposal from a guy in Spokane. So I would like to tell you one more story, how, sometimes people have a serendipitous event, right? By the way, when I applied for the visa to go to Spokane, the American guy looked at my passport, saw the stamp that I was in Hungary, that I was in the United States, and said, "Oh, it's okay." And he said, "What is the purpose of you to travel to Spokane? This is some kind of city in Spokane." I said, "Well, I have friends and they want to visit their library." He opened the eyes and said, "Library? Why? What special is about library?" I did not know that something special is the view. But when I came first to Spokane, I saw the view. And I wish I knew that before. But anyways, when I was in the English club, I had very many pen friends, and not only correspondents. I met some of them, like Lisa in California. She was the one who introduced me to Steve Johnston. That's why I have the name Johnston. Lisa had an adoption agency in Russia, and she wanted me to be her agent, but I refused because I enjoyed my job, and I had lots to do, so I didn't. But we met, Lisa and I met in Moscow. And when we met in Moscow, she said, I have a request from a guy from America. He's a young student from Alabama, and because he is very young, he needs to be kind of helped with homestay. Can you arrange that? Can you organize that? And I did. His name was Chris. So I organized, and the efforts of all the club, we were supervising him, we were helping him. He came by train, for some reason, I don't know, from Moscow, and was instructed, don't speak any English. He knew Russian. Actually, the purpose of his, according to Chris, was to immerse himself in the culture and the language, to be able to speak fluently. So we found a family, Russian family. Nobody spoke English. Just the children were speaking German, the parents didn't know any languages, so, and they hosted him. Guess what? Chris appeared, and this is surprising for me, I think he was a spy, not just an ordinary student, to tell the truth. He was such a super learner. Within 1 year, he spoke fluent Russian without any accent. Then 2 years after, because I had a part-time job at the music college as a teacher, so he joined me. We were working together in tandem. He got a paid job in Magnitogorsk. Then he moved to a different city, and I didn't see him because he moved. I had my life, and here I am in Moscow airport. I don't remember, Vnukovo maybe, or Domodedovo, because there are several airports. Sitting and waiting for my flight to Seattle. And I see Chris. And Chris is coming. And I saw him and said, "Chris, what are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm flying to visit my mom," and his mom lived in England, though his mom was American and his father was a Brit. So anyway, and he said, "And what are you doing here?" And they said, "Well, I got an invitation, and this is a marriage proposal." And he said, "Well, don't be so naive. Don't think that you can trust all people, especially abroad." And I asked him, "How about you? What have you been doing?" It appeared that from Magnitogorsk, he moved to the city where a well-known opposition leader of Putin, Nemtsov, was a governor. And he was his consultant for a while. So Chris gave me the address of his mom and said if I need help, just talk to her, write to her, and so on. Yeah, for a while I had a contact with her. And in my last letter to her, that was email, I asked, where is Chris now? She said, we never know where he is. We only know that he is somewhere on the east. So anyway, a remarkable experience of meeting a young man, very talented. So anyways, I am thankful for my ex-husband to introducing me to this community where I can share my liberal views of human dignity, freedom, and tolerance. I must admit my first year in Spokane was very tough, but at least I had a choice to stay or go back to Russia. Fortunately for me, I came here at the peak of demand for Russian-speaking translators. For 18 years, I worked 2 jobs as a self-employed interpreter and an outreach worker for public health until my retirement in 2013. And in conclusion, what amazes me is that despite all the cruelty of the communist regime, the people of art, poets, writers, composers created masterpieces that became part of world culture. And what I find despicable is when, especially now with this nationalism, not only probably in Russia, but in the United States also, there could be awful words said. For example, recently I was on YouTube. You know what is flash mob? Yeah, you know flash mob. So I found this flash mob of music by Tchaikovsky. So I thought, oh, I am going to watch this flash mob. And there's a European city, the square, in the middle of the square, somebody comes into the middle, sits down and starts playing something, I don't remember the music, well, the name, but then the other musician joins him, another, and then the whole orchestra playing wonderful music, and the passers-by going and listening, and children enjoying the wonderful music by Tchaikovsky. And there is the Russian words in block letters. Nobody can kill Russian music or Russian culture. This is atrocious. I mean, who? This music, as well as poetry and novels, became a world culture. Anyways, the changes in the Russian society for the last 2 decades make me feel disheartened. A former KGB officer, a criminal from St. Petersburg, became a president for life. During his first term, Putin promised the Russian population what they wanted to hear: law and order, security and stability. 3 years ago, he declared it was God's will to start the war in Ukraine. Putin said he would bring the country into its former glory. Sounds familiar. A famous opposition leader that I already mentioned, Nemtsov, Boris Nemtsov, was assassinated 10 years ago near the Kremlin wall. He said that Putin's goal was to occupy the neighbor's territory and to give power to the oligarchy. His warning fell on deaf ears. It happens when people don't tell truth and facts from lies. Thank you.
Okay, and I think for sake of time, we're just going to move to the benediction.
For our benediction, I offer the words of Russian nuclear physicist and father of the Soviet H-bomb, also Soviet dissident and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Andrei Sakharov. I've always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb, and that was why I gave it to my people. But I've come to the conclusion that the most powerful weapon in the world is not the bomb, but the truth. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.